In the picturesque town of Charleston, South Carolina, the Davis family made a significant decision. Susan Davis, 38, and John Davis, 40, had spent many years trying to have a child but were unsuccessful. After much deliberation, they decided that adoption was the best path for them. They adopted a 6-year-old girl named Lily, who quickly became the center of their lives, filling the void they had felt for so long. Susan worked as a primary school teacher, known for her dedication to her students and her nurturing nature. John was a successful lawyer with a reputation for being fair and hardworking. Together, they provided a loving and stable home for Lily, who thrived under their care. The adoption process had been long and challenging, but the joy Lily brought into their lives made it all worthwhile. She was a bright and curious child, full of energy and enthusiasm. Susan and John doted on her, ensuring she had everything she needed to grow and develop. They enrolled her in a good school, encouraged her interests, and spent quality time with her on weekends exploring parks, museums, and other attractions in Charleston. The Davis family lived in a beautiful house in one of Charleston's historic districts. The home was a reflection of their personalities, warm, inviting, and full of character. They often hosted gatherings for friends and family, who marveled at the close bond between Susan, John, and Lily. To outsiders, they appeared to be the perfect family. Despite the challenges that came with parenting, Susan and John were committed to providing a stable and nurturing environment for Lily. They attended parenting classes, sought advice from other adoptive parents, and read extensively on how to support an adopted child's unique needs. Their efforts paid off as Lily grew more confident and secure in her new home. Susan's career as a teacher allowed her to balance work and family life effectively. She was able to be there for Lily after school and during vacations. John, although often busy with his legal practice, made it a point to be present for important events in Lily's life. He attended her school plays, sports games, and parent-teacher conferences, ensuring that Lily always felt supported and loved. The decision to adopt had brought new meaning to Susan and John's lives. They cherished every moment with Lily, watching her grow and develop into a wonderful young girl. The challenges they had faced in trying to have a biological child seemed distant and unimportant in light of the happiness Lily brought into their lives. In the years that followed, the Davis family continued to thrive. Lily excelled in school, made many friends, and developed a close bond with her parents. Susan and John were proud of the family they had built and looked forward to the future with optimism and hope. However, several years later, cracks began to form in their seemingly perfect life. While Lily had grown into a smart and perceptive teenager, Susan began to feel a sense of dissatisfaction in her marriage. The routine and predictability of her life, which once brought her comfort, now felt stifling. One day, Susan joined a local gym in an effort to break the monotony of her daily routine. There, she met Brad, a 35-year-old charismatic fitness trainer. Brad was everything John was not: spontaneous, energetic, and full of life. He paid attention to Susan, complimented her, and made her feel desired in a way she hadn't felt in years. What began as casual conversations during her workouts quickly developed into a deep emotional connection. Before long, Susan and Brad were involved in a full-blown affair. Susan went to great lengths to keep her infidelity hidden. She created elaborate lies to explain her absences, telling John she was working late or attending school functions. She deleted messages and calls from Brad, ensuring there was no trace of their relationship. Her efforts were driven by a fear of losing everything she had built with John and Lily. Despite her actions, Susan convinced herself that she was still a good wife and mother, maintaining the facade of a perfect life. But Lily, now a perceptive teenager, started to notice changes in her mother's behavior. Susan became more secretive and often seemed distracted. She was frequently away from home, claiming she had various commitments. Lily noticed her mother's increased nervousness and the way she would abruptly end phone calls or hide her phone screen. The warmth and attentiveness that once defined Susan's relationship with Lily began to wane, replaced by a cold distance. Susan's absences did not go unnoticed by John either. However, he attributed her behavior to stress from work and the pressures of managing their household. He trusted Susan implicitly and never imagined she would be unfaithful. His focus remained on his demanding career and ensuring Lily had everything she needed. John's trust and preoccupation allowed Susan to continue her affair without immediate suspicion. As months passed, Susan and Brad's relationship grew more intense. They found ways to meet in secret, sneaking away to hotels and secluded spots around Charleston. Brad offered Susan an escape from her mundane life, and she became increasingly dependent on him for emotional fulfillment. The thrill of the affair and the danger of getting caught only heightened Susan's feelings for Brad. Lily's suspicions grew stronger with each passing day. She began to notice more inconsistencies in her mother's stories and the unusual patterns in her behavior. Lily observed the way Susan's demeanor changed when she received texts or calls and how she seemed to be constantly on edge. Determined to uncover the truth, Lily started paying closer attention to her mother's activities, noting the times she left the house and the excuses she provided. Susan's double life started to take a toll on her. The stress of maintaining her secret and the fear of being discovered weighed heavily on her mind. She struggled to keep up the charade of being the perfect wife and mother while managing the demands of her affair. The strain began to affect her interactions with John and Lily, creating a palpable tension in the household. John, though still unaware of the affair, sensed that something was wrong. He noticed Susan's mood swings and her increasing detachment from family life. Concerned for her well-being, he suggested they spend more time together, and even considered taking a family vacation to reconnect. Susan, however, dismissed his suggestions, claiming she was too busy with work and other commitments. The more Lily delved into Susan's behavior, the more convinced she became that her mother was hiding something significant. Brad, sensing Susan's anxiety, reassured her, promising that everything would be fine. He encouraged her to continue the affair, feeding her desire for excitement and escape. Lily's investigation led her to more concrete evidence. She found hidden messages on Susan's phone and noticed unfamiliar numbers in her call log. One evening, while Susan was out, Lily searched her mother's belongings and found a hotel receipt with Brad's name on it. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, confirming Lily's worst fears. Armed with this information, Lily faced a difficult decision. She could confront her mother and risk the fallout, or she could keep the secret, hoping it would eventually come to light on its own. The weight of the secret was too much to bear, and Lily knew she had to take action. One afternoon, while Susan was out, Lily decided to conduct a more thorough search of her mother's belongings. In Susan's bedside drawer, she found a hidden compartment containing a smartphone she had never seen before. With a pounding heart, Lily turned it on and was immediately confronted with a string of incriminating messages between her mother and Brad. The messages were explicit and left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Scrolling through, Lily also found photos of Susan and Brad together, their expressions and poses confirming the affair. Shocked and furious, Lily felt her world collapse around her. Determined to confront her mother and reveal the truth to her father, Lily waited for Susan to return home. When Susan walked through the door, Lily was ready. She stood in the living room, phone in hand, her face a mask of anger and betrayal. "Mom, we need to talk," Lily said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Susan, sensing the gravity of the situation, tried to maintain her composure. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I know about you and Brad," Lily spat out, holding up the phone. "I found your messages and pictures. How could you do this to us?" Susan's face went pale. She reached for the phone, but Lily pulled it back. "Lily, please let me explain," Susan begged, her voice shaking. "No, you've lied enough," Lily shouted. "You've been sneaking around, cheating on Dad. How could you betray him like this? How could you betray us?" Realizing the severity of the situation, Susan felt panic rising within her. She tried to take a step toward Lily, but her daughter backed away. "Lily, I'm so sorry. It's not what you think. I never meant for this to happen. Please don't tell your father. It will destroy our family." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but her resolve was firm. "You already destroyed our family, Mom. How could you expect me to keep this a secret? Dad deserves to know the truth." Susan fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Lily, I'm begging you. Don't do this. Don't tear us apart. I'll end it with Brad, I promise. Just don't tell your father." Lily remained unmoved. The image of her mother's betrayal was seared into her mind, and she couldn't bear the thought of living with the secret. "I can't, Mom. I won't lie for you. Dad needs to know." Realizing that her pleas were falling on deaf ears, Susan's demeanor shifted from desperation to fear. She understood that her carefully constructed facade of perfect life was about to crumble. The thought of John's reaction terrified her. She knew that once the truth came out, there would be no going back. She had to find a way to stop Lily from revealing her secret. But nothing she said seemed to sway her daughter. Lily stormed out of the room, determined to find her father and tell him everything. She couldn't let Susan's lies continue to poison their family. As she walked down the hall, she heard Susan's footsteps behind her. "Lily, wait," Susan called, but Lily ignored her. She found John in his study, working on a case. He looked up as she entered, immediately noticing her distressed state. "Lily, what's wrong?" John asked, concern etched on his face. Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Dad, I need to talk to you. It's about Mom." John's expression shifted to confusion and worry. "What is it, honey?" Before Lily could respond, Susan burst into the room, her face red and tear-streaked. "John, please don't listen to her. She's confused. It's not what she thinks." John stood up, looking between his wife and daughter. "What's going on here?" Lily held up the phone, her hand shaking. "Mom's been cheating on you, Dad. I found her messages and pictures with Brad. She's been lying to us." John's face went white as he took the phone from Lily. He scrolled through the messages and photos, his expression darkening with each passing second. He looked up at Susan, betrayal and anger burning in his eyes. "Susan, is this true?" he asked, his voice cold and hard. Susan broke down, unable to maintain the facade any longer. "Yes, John, it's true. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Please forgive me." John's hands clenched into fists, the phone forgotten on his desk. "How long?" he demanded. "About a year," Susan admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. John turned away, his mind racing. The woman he had loved and trusted had betrayed him in the worst possible way. He felt a mix of rage, hurt, and despair. He couldn't look at Susan, couldn't bear the sight of her. "Get out," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Get out of this house. I can't even look at you right now." Susan sobbed, trying to reach out to him, but he pushed her away. "I said get out." Lily watched the scene unfold, her heart breaking for her father. She had hoped that revealing the truth would bring some resolution, but instead, it had only brought more pain and chaos. As the days passed, Susan became consumed by the fear of losing everything she held dear. The fallout from Lily's revelation had already begun to fracture the family. John's trust in Susan was irreparably broken, and Lily's relationship with her mother had turned cold and distant. Susan harbored hopes for John's forgiveness and was looking for a chance to return to him, but John didn't want to listen to her. As soon as she came, he immediately kicked her out. In her desperation, Susan started to contemplate the unthinkable. She realized that as long as Lily was alive, her secret would never be safe. The idea terrified her, but the thought of losing her family, her reputation, and her standing in the community was even more horrifying. Driven by a mix of fear and self-preservation, Susan made a chilling decision: she would have to kill Lily to protect her secret. Susan spent days meticulously planning the murder. She needed to ensure that it looked like a tragic accident, something that no one would suspect was deliberate. She chose a remote nature reserve several miles outside of Charleston, a place they had visited before as a family. It was secluded, and the rough terrain provided the perfect cover for her plan. Susan decided to stage Lily's death as a fall, hoping that the authorities would believe it was a tragic mishap. On a sunny Saturday morning, Susan approached Lily with a proposal. "How about we go for a hike today? Just the two of us, like we used to. We need some time to talk and clear the air." Lily was wary but agreed, hoping that this might be an opportunity to mend their broken relationship. Susan's demeanor seemed genuine, and for a moment Lily allowed herself to believe that her mother might be trying to make amends. They packed a picnic and drove to the nature reserve. The drive was filled with uneasy silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Susan kept a close eye on the clock, timing their arrival to ensure that they would be in the most secluded part of the reserve during a time when few hikers would be around. When they reached the trailhead, Susan led Lily down a narrow path that wound through the dense forest. The trail was rocky and uneven, the perfect setting for an accidental fall. As they walked, Susan tried to engage Lily in conversation, but her mind was racing with the horrific plan she was about to execute. After hiking for about an hour, they reached a steep cliffside that overlooked a deep ravine. Susan suggested they take a break and enjoy the view. They sat down on a large rock, and Susan unpacked the picnic, trying to act as normal as possible. Her heart pounded in her chest, knowing that the moment of no return was approaching. As Lily stood up to stretch, Susan saw her chance. With a sudden, violent motion, she pushed Lily towards the edge. Lily stumbled and screamed, but the cliffside was treacherous, and she lost her footing. She fell hard, hitting her head on a protruding rock before plummeting into the ravine below. The sound of her body hitting the rocks echoed through the forest, and then there was silence. Susan stood there, trembling, staring down at the lifeless body of her daughter. The reality of what she had done began to sink in, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her, which she forced herself to focus, knowing she had to complete her plan. Susan scrambled down to where Lily's body lay, ensuring there were no obvious signs of foul play. She arranged Lily's body to make it look like she had fallen naturally and hit her head on the way down. Satisfied that it looked like an accident, Susan climbed back up to the trail and called 911, her voice frantic and filled with feigned distress. "My daughter fell. She slipped and hit her head. Please send help quickly." The emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. Lily was pronounced dead at the scene. The paramedics and police conducted a brief investigation, but there was no immediate evidence to suggest anything other than a tragic accident. Susan played the role of the devastated mother perfectly, crying hysterically and clinging to John when he arrived at the scene. Back home, the news of Lily's death devastated John. He was inconsolable, unable to comprehend how such a tragedy could have befallen their family. Susan, though filled with guilt and horror at her actions, maintained her facade, comforting John and making all the necessary arrangements for Lily's funeral. The police conducted a routine investigation but found nothing suspicious. The autopsy confirmed that Lily had died from a severe head injury consistent with a fall. The case was quickly closed, and Lily's death was ruled an accident. John, unaware of the truth, leaned on Susan for support, believing her to be the grieving mother she pretended to be. The community rallied around the Davis family, offering condolences and support. Susan's reputation remained intact, but the weight of her crime was a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. Despite Susan's carefully constructed narrative, doubts began to arise within the police department. Detective Sarah Miller, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, was assigned to the case. Sarah, 45, had seen numerous tragic accidents throughout her career, but something about Lily's death didn't sit right with her. The initial investigation had been cursory, and Sarah decided to take a closer look. Sarah started by reviewing the 911 call and Susan's statement. The more she listened to Susan's frantic recounting of the event, the more inconsistency she noticed. Susan's timeline was vague, and some details seemed off. Sarah visited the nature reserve, walking the same trail Susan and Lily had taken. The terrain was indeed rough, but certain elements didn't match Susan's description of the fall. It seemed too convenient that Lily had fallen precisely in a manner that resulted in fatal injuries. Sarah began to dig deeper into Susan's background. She interviewed friends, neighbors, and colleagues, piecing together a picture of the Davis family's dynamics. While most people described Susan and John's marriage as stable and loving, a few hinted at underlying tensions. The more Sarah learned, the more she felt that there was more to Lily's death than met the eye. Meanwhile, John was drowning in grief. The loss of his daughter had shattered him, and he struggled to find meaning in the wake of the tragedy. His once unwavering faith in Susan began to waver as he replayed the events leading up to Lily's death in his mind. Susan's behavior, her distant and evasive demeanor, started to seem suspicious to him. Detective Miller, now with substantial proof of Susan's infidelity and potential motive, reopened the investigation with renewed vigor. She interviewed Brad, who reluctantly confirmed the affair but denied any knowledge of a plot to kill Lily. Brad's alibi for the day of the accident checked out, but his testimony added to the growing suspicion around Susan. Sarah began to re-examine the physical evidence from the scene. The positioning of Lily's body, the lack of defensive wounds, and the precise nature of her injuries all pointed to something more deliberate than a simple fall. The forensic analysis revealed that the injuries were consistent with a forceful push rather than a stumble. With the mounting evidence, Sarah obtained a warrant to search the Davis household. In Susan's belongings, they found a draft of an unsent email addressed to Brad, expressing her fear of losing everything if the affair were exposed. This, coupled with the hidden phone and the inconsistencies in Susan's story, painted a damning picture. Sarah decided it was time to bring Susan in for questioning. During the interrogation, Susan maintained her innocence regarding Lily's death, but struggled to explain the discrepancies in her story. Her demeanor shifted from confident to desperate as Sarah methodically dismantled her narrative. The turning point came when Sarah presented the forensic evidence. Faced with the irrefutable facts, Susan's composure cracked. She broke down, confessing that she had indeed pushed Lily, but insisting it was an accident, a moment of panic gone horribly wrong. Despite her claims, the evidence suggested premeditation. Susan's detailed planning, the remote location, and the timing all indicated that she had meticulously orchestrated the events leading to Lily's death. The police charged Susan with second-degree murder, and she was taken into custody. The news of Susan's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Friends and neighbors who had once admired the Davis family were stunned by the revelations. John, devastated by the betrayal and the loss of his daughter, found himself grappling with a deep sense of guilt and sorrow. The trial of Susan Davis was a high-profile case that attracted significant media attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, friends, and neighbors who had once seen the Davis family as a model of suburban perfection. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Susan's affair, her premeditated actions, and the calculated murder of Lily. The forensic evidence was damning. Expert witnesses testified about the nature of Lily's injuries, the positioning of her body, and the lack of defensive wounds, all pointing to a deliberate act rather than an accident. The unsent email to Brad, the hidden phone, and the discrepancies in Susan's statements all contributed to a narrative of guilt. Susan's defense tried to portray her as a woman driven to desperation by fear and panic. They argued that the push was a momentary lapse in judgment, not a premeditated act of murder. However, the jury was unconvinced. The meticulous planning and the cold execution of the act overshadowed any claims of an impulsive mistake. John sat in the courtroom, his face a mask of anguish and disbelief. The life he had known was gone, shattered by the actions of the woman he had once loved. He listened as the prosecution laid out the timeline of events, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of Susan's defense. The final verdict was delivered. Susan Davis was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Davis family. Susan was led away in handcuffs, her face a mix of defiance and regret. The reality of her new life behind bars began to set in as the cell door clanged shut. She had traded her freedom for a secret, and now she would spend the rest of her life paying for that decision. For John, the path to healing was long and arduous. He sold the house in Charleston, unable to bear the memories that haunted every room. Friends and neighbors offered their support, but the weight of the tragedy was a burden he had to carry alone. He focused on honoring Lily's memory, setting up a scholarship fund in her name to help other children in need. Detective Sarah Miller received commendation for her relentless pursuit of justice. Her keen instincts and dedication had uncovered the truth and brought a murderer to justice. The case was closed, but the impact of Lily's death and Susan's actions would linger in the community for years to come.